Welcome to In All Things. I'm Sierra, and I would love to welcome you into my living room to have real conversations with you about everything from forgiveness and personalities to community and discipleship. So let's imagine we're sitting on my couch and encouraging each other to seek Christ in all things. Hi, Sharon. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I am so excited. This is going to be wonderful. Before we really dive in, I just kind of want you to introduce who you are on a basic level to our listeners, and then we can go from there.
Okay, so I am Sharon. I am a 33-year-old as of today. No, it's not my birthday or anything, but as of this point. And I am a single mom, and I work in financial services, and I am the oldest of 5 kids, and we live in Northeast Pennsylvania, where it is beautiful right now. And the trees are just, the green that is the trees is just glorious. And so it's beautiful here. And so yeah, I'm a mom. I am a Christian. I am a sister, a daughter, a mother, a friend. That's a little bit about me.
That's wonderful. Thank you. It is turning summer here in Minnesota as well, and we are excited. But it finally is, right?
Yes.
But fun to have you introduce the different roles that you play in your life. That's really cool. Well, I was just telling you that I have been praying for a while about doing an episode regarding the sanctity of life, because it is such an important topic, especially right now, because we're as a society, we're in the throes of fighting for that. And a few weeks ago, you had shared a glimpse of your story on Instagram.
Yes.
And I just knew that I had to take that opportunity to ask you to be a guest on the podcast and share your story here, because pro-life versus pro-choice, it's such a hot topic right now. And I wanted to be able to bring someone's real life story into this conversation because it can be a delicate conversation, but it's a very important one to have. So I am glad that you are here. Will you start by sharing your testimony of coming to Christ?
Sure. So I grew up in a pastor's home. And so my parents have been preachers since, I don't know, my mom gave her life to the Lord when she was 11. And my dad, when he was in his 20s, I think. And so he has this miraculous, amazing testimony of being healed of cancer in his early 20s.
Oh, wow.
Like kind of story where the doctor rips up the bills and says, I have no idea how you're here because it wasn't me.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So I have this rich, godly tradition in our home. And I think I was 4 when I recognized that I was a sinner in need of a savior. And my parents prayed with me in my room. And I was 4.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I grew up in church, and I went to school like normal kids. We had some difficulty in my early high school years and some different challenges that our family faced, some trials, and, as the song says, toils and snares, right? And there was a season in my teenage to early college years where I guess I was the prodigal, you could say. I was just angry at God. Like, why would you allow this to happen? It was the problem of suffering. And it took me a few years and a lot of being battered and bruised by serving the God of my belly to recognize that in my Father's house, at least even if I was a servant in my Father's house, like the prodigal said, right?
Yeah.
And so there we are. And part of that story is the time when I met my daughter's father is kind of in there. And so it was a season where I was coming back to God and I recognized my need for his love. But I was also like so messed up from my own sin that I had a lot of I used to say I took up too much emotional space. Like I had a lot of emotional needs because I was super insecure from just living a life that was sinful. And I knew that it was wrong. So like I had constant like cognitive dissonance. Like I grew up knowing the Bible and knowing what was right and wrong. And I was purposely choosing the opposite. And by the time that I realized and kind of got a good slap upside the head, I was like, wow, I messed everything up, you know.
Mm,
But God is gracious and most kind, and Jesus is ever living to make intercession for us. I live that. Like that's my story.
mm,
Is that um, you're always in, you're never out when you're
mm.
a child of God.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
I can't take credit for it. I heard someone
Yeah.
else say it, but it's true. And
Mhm.
so that's a little bit about my story. So I was we'll say I was 21 when I met my daughter's father, and I was in that coming home phase, but
Okay.
I was still super, 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 super insecure,
Okay.
and I had a lot of sin to still. God, I needed so much sanctification. Like
Mm.
I was just
Don't we all?
so bad. It was a mess, and I obviously I still do, but there was a lot of immature kinds of sin that
Mm.
was
Okay.
there, and God was just very, 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 very patient with me.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's how God is. So that's a little bit of my testimony, and here I am today after having my daughter. And I know we're going to get into that,
Yeah.
but after having my daughter and just experiencing the grace of God, both in my heart and in my life with other believers, that really God used the body of Christ to show me love and grace in a way that was transformative and drew my heart to Him and um, just encouraged surrender so that He could do the work in my heart. Like there was a tenderness that God allowed that I knew I didn't deserve.
Mm.
I just knew it. And so it could only come from a loving and gracious and holy God. And that's my story.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. That's beautiful. And it's so cool to hear how you just, that God grabbed your heart again. And
Yes.
oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So let's get into this, to the story. You kind of mentioned it a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
you having your daughter. You're a single mom now. What does that story look like in choosing life for your daughter?
Sure. So I, like I said, the teenage years were tough, and
Mm.
I didn't have a good sense of like identity. So I remember being 15 and 16 and not knowing where my worth came from. Like, which
Okay.
is sad because I grew up in a Christian home, but I don't think, I certainly wasn't consciously taught, like actively. I didn't grow up in a home where it was like, okay, today we're going to learn a doctrine of soteriology. That wasn't
Okay.
the kind of Christian upbringing. I mean, obviously, I learned how God saves us, and I
Hmm.
learned how, what sin is, but I didn't have it in like a structured kind of way. So that I could see the cans that these things came in. Um, but so I didn't have a good sense of identity, and so I was always looking for validation and approval and love from external sources rather than from eternal ones.
Okay.
And that pattern continued throughout college, especially at the time where I was just angry at God. I was like, if he's loving, then like, what is love? Like, it can't be this. Because our
Mm.
family just went through so many trials and difficulties, and it was people that I love, like my family, and they were hurting and
Mhm.
broken, and our lives just kind of felt like we were shipwrecked. And so I go through college. I have a lot of difficult experiences there, a lot of challenges. I don't like the word trauma because it's overused, but you could call
Yeah.
it that.
Okay.
Difficulties, right? Things
Yep.
that leave a mark
Hmm.
emotionally and mentally. And so by the time I graduate college, I have a degree in psychology.
Okay.
And I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. So that's where the accent is from. If it's confusing to you, it's because I've been in Pennsylvania for 17 years.
Oh.
Why it sounds almost New Yorker, but not quite. Um, so I graduate college and I go back to Brooklyn to serve as a psychology extern at the church where I grew up. They have a children's ministry where the church that I grew up in is in inner city Brooklyn, like in one of the poorest areas where it's kind of a neighborhood where a large Hispanic, Asian, Muslim, and Jewish community kind of intersect. And there's a lot of poverty, drugs. It's just a really poor area.
Okay.
And so all the things that are associated with poverty are there: fatherlessness, people who English is not their first language or their
Mm,
second.
okay.
And so they have this program that's run. It is a ministry that started out of the church, but now is its own thing. And in the church, the kids come for the summer and they learn reading and math skills. And we improved their math and reading skills by 1 grade level in a summer, which is pretty cool.
That's
And
awesome.
we offered psychology services. So I worked I was the person who provided like counseling and case management to the kids and the families that were there. And I needed like a real job because I was just an externship making like $100 a week, and I was living at the pastor's house, but that wasn't sustainable, right? So
Hmm.
I I decided I wanted to stay in Brooklyn. I loved it, and I didn't want to go home to Pennsylvania. I was hokey, like city. Who doesn't want to leave the city? And so I decided to get a real job. And so I got this job working in sales in the Toys R Us that was in Times Square. It's not there anymore, but it was so big that it had a Ferris wheel inside.
Oh, okay. I think I've heard of that.
Okay,
Hmm.
yes, it was like 3 stories. It was this huge thing. So my job wasn't. I didn't work for Toys R Us. I worked for a vendor that worked inside Toys R Us, and we sold products like nail polish and stickers and toys. And my job was to like do a demonstration, kind of like those people at the mall that sell you like the hand lotion.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, like that. And I obviously have the personality to sell people things. And so I had so much fun. I made a good living selling products every day. I basically played with toys for all day with
Okay.
and convinced kids to like get their mom to buy them this sticker pack or whatever.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it was really fun. And that's where I met my daughter's father. One day I was working and he came down this like they had this walkway from the Barbie house, and I was at the bottom of the hill but after the Barbie house, and I was selling nail polish that day, and I was doing demonstrations. The nail polish was like draw art. It was like art nail polish.
Okay.
And so I was doing demonstrations like, let me show you how this works. And all of a sudden he came and he had a group of friends and he was like, Miss, can you paint my nails too? Can you paint my nails too? Um, and so I was like, no, get away from me. But he gave me a lot of attention. And remember, at this time, I am just super insecure and starved for connection and affection. And I want to do the right thing, but I just have no skills to, like, that verse that says, a friend must show himself friendly. Like, I
Yes.
just didn't know how to do that. Like, I really didn't.
Mm.
And I had lived such an isolated life for 7 or 8 years that I wanted to connect with people, but I didn't know how. And so even at my church, I was trying, but it was like slow going. And so here was this man who was tall and dark and handsome, and he was giving me attention. And so I kind of went, and I, fell head over heels.
Sure.
And it was very, very, very quickly that I became pregnant. And I remember feeling out, not myself, and going to the ER because for many years, I had been sick with a thyroid disease, and they told me you'll never be able to have children.
Oh.
So I had pregnancy symptoms though. So I was like, maybe something's wrong. Like maybe I have an ectopic pregnancy. Like I
Oh.
don't feel well. And the doctors assured me that I can't have a baby.
Yeah.
And so I went and got a test. Like I went and told them like, these are my symptoms. I don't feel well. Here's the disease that I have. He's like, well, let's just do a pregnancy test first. I'm like, okay, but they said I can't do that. And so when he came back, the doctor's like, so you're pregnant? And I was like, how? And he's like, well, when a man and a woman, I'm like, no, 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 I know how. 22 almost. I'm like, I get it. So yeah, so it turns out we're pregnant, right? And so I'm waiting in the room, and they tell me that I'm pregnant, and I'm so shocked. I grew up a preacher's kid. Like, you're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage, and you're definitely not supposed to be an unwed mom. Like, that is the thing you're not supposed to do.
Right. Hmm.
And the woman in New York City hospitals, they don't have a lot of space. There's your footprint is small because of the cost of real estate, and so in the emergency room, you don't really have rooms. You have cordoned off by shower curtains areas.
Oh.
So kind of like if you ever had surgery and they had you in those shower curtain kind of rooms,
Yeah.
like that, but that's how all the ER rooms are.
Okay.
So you can hear what's happening to the patient in the next stall. You just give them courtesy and don't bother them.
Okay.
So she can hear me and I can hear her, and she's bleeding, and she had an abortion recently. And she has not stopped bleeding since her abortion a few months ago.
Oh my goodness.
And they tell me that I'm pregnant, and she can hear them telling me that. And I'm sitting in that room on that bed staring at the pregnancy test. It was a little square guy. And I'm just feeling like my whole life is ruined and it's over. And I hate everything. And I hate myself. And I hate him. And I hate this pain that I feel. And I hate that God has always abandoned me. And I never have any support. And then the doctors leave us both. And she pulls that curtain aside and she looks at me, and she's this beautiful Black woman with piercing brown eyes. And she says, "You're going to keep the baby, right?" And I was like, "Of course." Meanwhile, inside, I'm like, I had literally have no idea what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And she was like, "Good, because you never forget."
Oh my goodness.
And so I call my daughter's father, and he says, "I can't have another kid. You need to get rid of this." And I was like, "Well, this kid is had.
Yeah.
You should have thought about that before, because the kid is had now." And I hung up the phone after that lovely conversation, and they took me to the sonogram room to make sure that I didn't have an ectopic pregnancy, because I was pretty confident and knowledgeable about my symptoms enough that they weren't sure that everything was okay. But that was a blessing, because I was not even full 4 weeks pregnant yet. She literally looked on the sonogram like a kidney bean with a circle inside.
Wow.
And the sound of her heartbeat going poo, 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 changed my life forever. Like, even though I was terrified, even though I had no idea how I was going to tell everyone, even though I knew I could see a deluge of shame, like a tidal wave coming towards me, I knew that I needed to protect her with my life. And so that's what I did. And there were lots of people in my life, non-Christian people, because I wasn't talking to any Christians, because I was living in sin with my boyfriend. So I wasn't talking to any Christians,
okay,
of course. But lots of people told me, like, you have a whole future ahead of you. My family, like non-Christian members of my family, you have a whole future ahead of you. A child will ruin it. Like, one person said, she was a really close friend of mine, someone that I loved, and she was like a mom to me. And she was like, "I'm basically getting rid of my only chance for a grandchild, but you really can't have this baby."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. She like took me out for coffee to tell me that. And I know that she didn't mean it. Like, I know that she thought she was loving me. Because lots of people in the pro-choice movement think that they're being loving to moms when they say, just take care of it. So that's the story of how I found out that I was pregnant. And after that, pretty soon after that, I became pretty sick. I had a very, very rough pregnancy. And so I stopped being able to work. I lived in my daughter's father. That was a pretty abusive and dangerous situation. So I got away from him, and I lived in a battered women's shelter for a while. And eventually I went home and lived with my parents, and they took really good care of me. And I gained weight because I had lost, like in the first 5 weeks, from week 7 to week 12, I lost almost 50 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
And I was in the hospital for 5 days. And I came close to death, very close. And I felt the life like seeping out of me slowly, like if I had a leak, because I was just so weak. My body was just in haywire, but she was fine. Every time they tested her, I had 1 million sonograms during that time, and she was fine. She was growing normal. All her weight and everything was healthy. It was a miracle, of course, because every good and perfect gift comes from above. And she was a gift. She was like the spot of joy in this like nightmare that I was living, because I felt like my life was over, which is silly, but that's how I felt at the time.
Yeah.
And so I lived with my parents after that, and she was born in February of 2012, and she is now 10 years old, which is insane.
Oh my goodness.
She's in 4th grade. She's huge. She is 4'10". And
oh my goodness.
10 years old. So she's like here on me.
Crazy.
For though I know it's not recorded, she's at about just above my chin, which is insane.
Yeah.
She's beautiful and brilliant, and she loves Jesus. This morning, she woke up. I accidentally woke her, and she said, "Mom, can I just pray for you for a minute?" Oh. And then she went back to sleep. She prayed for me that I would have a great day, and then she fell back asleep.
Oh, so sweet. That's so sweet. Oh my goodness, Sharon. Like, that story. Wow. And just the fact that the woman next to you in that hospital room That so stands out to me, because while it's kind of sounds like an odd thing to say, that was such a God thing.
It was. Like, what
For
are the odds that she would be next to me?
yeah.
And they were talking to her. I had so much compassion for her. I mean, she was suffering. She had been
Mm-hmm.
bleeding for months.
That's awful.
Like, they did something wrong. They broke something.
Mm-hmm.
They're so compassionate, They know what they're doing.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But it also just, it shows, like, that small interaction with you and her shows that there's so much heartbreak in that choice
Yep.
and not freedom like they want and they expect.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
But like hearing you talk about your daughter and that and this story, like, you sound like you have joy, and I'm watching you and you look like you have so much joy, and just from following you on Instagram, she is your greatest joy
She is.
on this earth, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So praise the Lord for how that story has come about in your life.
It's a good thing, and she makes me laugh, and she's funny and creative and thoughtful, and she's artistic, and she just has so many. She's her own person, she's not
Mm-hmm.
me, but she
Right.
certainly has a lot of me, for better or
Right.
for worse. And she also has a lot of her dad. She never met him. He was incarcerated for most of her first 3 years of life,
Okay.
and he passed away before she turned 6.
Oh.
So she never met him, and that's something, that's a regret that I have. I didn't want them to stay apart forever. I just wanted him to be safe. But
Mm-hmm.
he's her dad,
Yeah.
and I'm the one who has to comfort her when I catch her grieving. She'll sit in the hall in the dark. What's wrong, baby? You okay? I miss my dad. you know so that's a real thing,
Mm-hmm.
and she deserves better, but here we are, and God is gracious, and he's provided lots of men in our life who love her, and so she has masculine mentors, but not her dad.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, as you were sharing, you mentioned when you went home, your family took you in and took really good care of you. So you found support then from like friends and family back
Hmm.
home. Okay.
Yes, and the church.
And the church.
So the home that I stayed in for battered women was a home run by a church in Brooklyn,
Okay.
and I didn't pay anything to live there, and
Mm-hmm.
they provided me with lots of things that I needed, and let me have a clean and safe and beautiful place to live in a comfortable home
Mm-hmm.
with godly people who, did Bible studies with me and prayed with me and encouraged me. The man who ran the house, he was like the house manager, and I was the only woman there at the time, which was kind of cool
Oh,
because it gave me, like, I needed the mental space,
sure.
And I remember me saying, like, how bad I felt about this, and how I just had a lot of insecurity, and there
Mm-hmm.
were people who were not treating me the same because I was, filthy or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
both in the church and out. And he said, Sharon, people just have an opinion about pregnant women, but once they see that baby, their minds are going to change. And that really stuck with me. Like, he's right. Babies are kind of irresistible.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so I'm just waiting, like, 30 more weeks, and then this is going to be better. Um, so that was helpful to me, even though it seemed forever away. Because I didn't, at the time when he said that, I didn't even have like a bump yet.
Sure.
But yeah, he was really an encouragement to me. He taught me a lot about the Bible. I had a lot of um, progressive ideas about the world and about the Bible, and those weeks that I spent in that house, he taught me things that made sense in a way that I could receive. He was just so generous, and that time was really special to me. And I felt really lonely a lot of the time, but now I realize, like, God, that was a grace to me that there was no one there. Everyone who was like, when I went home, so to speak, to the shelter, that was a place of peace, and
Mm-hmm.
because my mind was in chaos, and it took a lot of time for my mind to relax and for my heart to be confident that God's sovereign hand was over my life. And that season in that home was what did it for me. And that was run by Christians and paid for by Christians, and those were people who never met me before. and they took me in on an
Mm.
emergency. Like, I came there with a bag. I had nothing.
Wow.
And they provided me the things that I needed. I got clothes, shoes, toiletries. I had nothing. They hooked me up with
Mm.
like resources so that I could get what I needed. So I went to all the different appointments to get like, food stamps and all of that stuff because I was so sick I couldn't work.
Okay. Wow.
So the church did that. Then I moved home, and my family are obviously Christians, and there are different pregnancy resource center, the women's resource center that was like for battered women. Um, the pregnancy resource centers all run by Christians. I didn't even buy a sock for my daughter until she was like 2.
Oh my goodness.
Everything I needed was provided. I remember that winter I gave birth in February. So that winter, I had been given a voucher to go to this consignment shop and buy a coat. And the coat I bought was a floor length mink coat.
Oh my goodness.
And inside it, when I took it home, there was cash in the pockets. And
What?
yes. And we were so broke at that time that me and my mom just held that cash and we cried. Like, tears just streaming down our face. Like, what is this God who loves us? Like, he feeds the birds and he feeds the Ortizes, and he loves us, and he loves this baby,
Mm-hmm.
and he is gracious and most kind, most kind. Um, and the people in my life, even in my church, I remember there was whispers, women
Sure.
talking. And I remember my pastor one day standing up from the pulpit and saying, and you talk about women who are single moms, and yet they're here and they're worshiping God every day. How dare you? Who are
Mm.
you? Look at your own sin. And I wanted to like crawl, like,
Yeah.
he's talking about me.
Yeah.
Um, and so the church served me, so there's lots of people who say Christians are only pro birth, they're not pro life.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
is the most heinous lie of all. And if anyone gets anything out of this time that you and I are spending together, let them hear this. It is a lie that
Mm-hmm.
Christians are not loving and that they don't care about babies and mamas, both in the womb and out. I am living proof. Every victory that I have in my life, all the success, all the joy, all the triumph, is a direct result of the support that I got from the Church of Jesus Christ. Every single one.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. That's amazing. And as I was listening to you, I kept thinking about that. Like, we're hearing that so much right now
Yep.
in the just in the world of, they don't, Christians don't care. Christians don't take care of moms and babies after the fact. They only just want them to give birth. And oh my goodness, look at how many people provided for you and helped you and took you under their wing while you were pregnant
Yes.
and afterwards. And that's amazing.
I have this one friend who lives in New York. She's a friend of our family since before I was born. And she and her husband, she has a very successful husband. And so they have a really, they're well off, right? They're well to do. And when she found out I was pregnant, she was so happy. Like, she just skipped over all the like sin stuff. She was like, I'm so happy you're going to have such a beautiful baby. What can I give you?
Oh.
And I was like, what? She sent me boxes of baby girl clothes that still had like Baby Gap tags on them.
Oh my
For
goodness.
months she did that. And she sent them, my dear, from New York City and then from Canada. Because her
Oh.
husband got promoted and he got moved to Canada, and she sent me clothes, and she was so funny. Oh my gosh. She was like, my next child is gonna be a boy. I'm no more girls, so you can have all my girl clothes.
Oh my goodness.
She really did have a boy next.
Oh really?
I think God
Oh
just blessed her for all her generosity, honestly.
yeah, that is so generous.
Yes.
So
I mean,
generous.
clothes with tags on it.
Yeah.
Foods between I had so much support. I'm not kidding. I bought her diapers and wipes as a baby, but I didn't buy her anything else. I didn't have to buy her a blanket, a sock, a shoe, nothing. The only thing I bought the dress that she wore out of the hospital because I wanted to, but
Sure.
I didn't have to buy her anything.
Sure.
I
Oh
I
my goodness.
I went to the church that I grew up in one of the days when I was pregnant, and they gave me the like bouncy saucer, they gave me a crib, they gave me a high chair. All of it was gently used. So I didn't
Wow.
buy it. And then the pregnancy resource center gave me the rocking chair set with the ottoman
Oh my
that
goodness.
normally costs like $400. And it was, the cushions were hand sewn. Like, it was fabric that was made by a woman.
Wow.
So I sat on this comfy, I nursed my daughter for 22 months in that rocker.
Wow.
But please, the church is pro-birth, though.
Right.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
That pregnancy
I'm
center
getting chills.
had a garage full of things to give moms. A garage full. They didn't park in the garage. The workers, the
Okay.
volunteers, they parked on the street because the garage was full of cribs and bassinets and strollers and baby bouncy saucers and diapers and wipes and clothes for mom, pregnancy clothes like pants, with the shape so that the belly is not uncomfortable, and dresses.
Mm.
Yeah, and I went shopping in their little boutique for things all the time.
Wow.
They would bribe you with counseling and prayer. So they would say, come to a counseling session and we'll give you a voucher and you can go shopping in our boutique.
Okay.
And so I would do biblical counseling and I would go shopping for me and my baby in the boutique.
Wow. That is amazing to hear.
Yeah.
That is, and it's encouraging to hear. So encouraging. Well, I mean, speaking of, this was a question I was going to ask you later, but might as well just ask it now.
Sure.
How can, as Christians, besides the options that are, you just gave a lot of ideas right there, but how else can we as Christians come alongside women with an unplanned pregnancy who need support and help? How can we encourage this choice of life with them and support them on their story?
So I think a couple of things. I think it's really important as believers. First of all, if the woman is not a believer, then compounding her problem with the problem of this sin of sex, like sex is not the only sin that she's committed, and sex is not the only sin that God needs to forgive. So like if she's not a believer, she needs to be called to repentance and she needs to hear the gospel. So that's first. If she is a believer and she has committed this act of sin while understanding the truth of the gospel, then she needs to be called to repentance and she needs to be loved. And so I'll give an example of what that looks like. So at the time when I met my daughter's father, there was a day where I was spending in the city with him, and I thought no one from my church knew what I was doing. But apparently my youth pastor and friend, he had been in the city and seen us together. And so he had messaged me, like sent me a text, or I forget, a message on Facebook maybe, like saying, when you come to church next, I want to talk to you. And it apparently was about him seeing me with him. But by the time we got together, I was already pregnant. And so, you know what he said to me that day? Because we talked about how he had wanted to talk to me because he saw me with my boyfriend. Okay. And I was like, yeah, but now here I am, basically saying like my life is over. And he was like, but you're going to be a great mom. And I think that kind of encouragement, because at this point the kid has had, like there might be, there's legitimacy in saying like, hey, we need to have a biblical sexual ethic. God placed sex for the confines of marriage and for good reason. But a lot of times I think there is the tendency to like harp on that sex belongs inside marriage, but not telling us the why. Like God has a good reason for that because he's loving. And I don't think we do a good job of explaining that. And B, like once the kid is had, like if it's conceived, it's there, it exists. And now It's time to provide support. And just those few words, like, you're going to be a great mom. 7 words. I have never forgotten them. It's been 11 years.
Yeah. People need that encouragement.
They do, because the reality is, yes, there was sin there. And I will be the first to get on my soapbox and say, flee sexual sin because it destroys. There's a pastor that I love, and he says, sex is like fire, and fire is really great in the fireplace and really bad on the floor in your living room. And that's what sex outside of marriage is like. It's like a fire that burns the house down, when a fire inside a fireplace would never do that, because it's in its right boundary. But once the fire has happened, now we need to deal with the smoke. We need to clean up the floor. We need to put out the fire, and we need to restore the home. And so if my life was a house that had burned, the love of Christians restored my home, the home of my heart and my emotions, and the support that they provided were like scaffolding, so that I wouldn't teeter over the edge of despair.
That's such a great analogy. Such a great analogy.
I'm glad.
Yeah. That, and it also, even just teaching, I mean, it's great to teach like teenagers, or when you're having those conversations with people. That's a
Hmm.
great analogy, even then, to teach what that sexual ethic can look like and
Yep.
why it's there too. So
Hmm.
that's wonderful.
Plus, I
That's
think
awesome.
it fits because like sexuality is intense like fire, and it almost feels like you're burning. Even Paul said, right, it's better
Mm-hmm.
to marry than to
Yeah.
burn. We all know what he
Mm-hmm.
meant by that. Right? He knew what he
True.
meant
Yeah.
by that.
Yeah. True. Oh, funny.
Especially for young people, I think sometimes we forget that in our desire to not like overdo it, we sometimes don't do
Mm-hmm.
enough. Like we don't say like you're literally going to feel like you're on fire with passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like that's going to happen. Or you're going to believe that this connection, this intimacy is going to get you something that only Christ can give.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That's
that was my
important.
story. Like I
Mm-hmm.
really thought that connecting with this man would make me feel loved and worthy and honorable. And the truth is that nothing can complete me except me coming to saving knowledge of Jesus Christ and understanding the truth of the gospel, which is that while I was yet a sinner, Christ died for me. He saved me from sin and Satan and hell and the wrath of God, and he became the propitiation, the stand in for my sin, and he went willingly. And that is transformative, not laying next to a man.
Preach, girl. Preach. Love it. You talked about when you were in Brooklyn at the home for battered women, that
Hmm.
you felt a lot of loneliness.
Yeah.
Did that kind of continue when you moved, even when you moved home, even though you were surrounded? Did you feel lonely or
Hmm.
shame, and how did you kind of combat that?
Oh, that's a really good question. My pastor, who passed away several years ago, he was like a father to me, the one who stood up for me in church.
Oh, okay.
He used to say that loneliness is not the absence of people; it's the absence of purpose.
Mm,
And I for a while had to sit on that one, but I think that you do life with other believers, and your purpose is to fulfill the Great Commission. And I didn't feel like I was capable of doing that because I was a dirty sinner, you know. um,
sure.
and so I didn't have a purpose in my life. I had lost sort of direction. I felt like the rug had been pulled out of me under me because I grew up in a church and in a church home, and knowing that like I had a trajectory for my life, and I took like a screeching halt, you know. And so I really didn't have that, but I also was still struggling with all these different emotional things. So like I wasn't a good friend. Like I didn't know how to like come up to someone and have a conversation, not because I wasn't good at talking, because I've always been a talker, but because I didn't know how to connect with people and serve them and love them. I always like needed, I was so needy. I was like a
Mm,
sucker of like love and affection, and I like needed it. I was like a leech rather than like a sunflower, you know. It was
okay.
nothing. Yeah. And so that loneliness carried with me, and the shame, that tidal wave of shame, it did hit me. And I went under, and I
Mm,
was there for a really long time. And even after my daughter was born, I remember sitting in therapy and going like, I wish I could just undo all of this. And my therapist would say, well then Sharon, your daughter wouldn't be here. And I'm like, I know. And then I would feel so
mm,
guilty that I thought that because I love my
sure.
daughter.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time. And what did it was a book that most people hate in the Christian world. But that
Uh-oh.
book changed my life, but not for the reasons that most people think. But that book was I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris.
Okay.
And everybody hates that book. And it's really sad to me because that book was so wonderful. God used it in my life, but he could have used anything, you know? He used a
Yeah.
donkey in the Bible. Like he could have used whatever.
Right.
But that book helped me to understand God's love, and also to understand some practical things that I was doing that were inhibiting my relationship with God and the flourishing of my life.
Mm,
And so once I did that, it was like a light switch turned on, and my prayer life improved, and my connection to Christ improved, and my connection with other people, because I was so transformed by the love of God in my life. I saw people with fresh eyes, and I was able to be loving because I knew that Jesus loved me a ton. Because
yeah.
I didn't deserve it, but he gave it. And so that really helped. But I would say the shame was there for a really long time. And a lot of it was probably self imposed. You know, I knew that I was just so wrong. I remember telling my pastor's wife when I first told her that I was pregnant, like, I was like, I ruined my life. It's over. I'm pregnant.
Mm,
And she was like, your life's just taking a small detour. That's what she said. Small detour, it's fine.
Yeah.
And she was right. Like I teetered for a second there, but I'm still fine. Everything is great. And
Yeah.
in fact, it's better because my daughter is here and we get to do this life journey together. Because
Hmm.
she's a gift. She's a joy. She's a treasure.
Yeah.
And she was, the rose that bloomed from concrete. She just unlikely how beautiful and precious she would be, and how much joy she would bring to not just myself but our whole family.
I hear a lot of redemption in your story.
Isn't that all of our stories?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very true. Yes. But it's just so wonderful to hear that, like to hear from when you first found out you were pregnant and you thought your life was over and it was ruined.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, like you're talking with so much joy and contentment and full of life now. Like that is God redeeming your story, and that's so amazing.
God is an artist. I think in a lot of ways, I'm using a metaphor, right? But he's like an artist, and we paint our canvas black, and he does something magical with it. Something
Yeah.
like my life is a work of art, but it's he's the painter. And so when I look at all the good in my life and all the reasons for God's love, all the people that have supported me, all the ways that I've been successful, even in my job, I had to provide for her. There was no one else. And I became successful at work just because I just did what God said. I worked heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. That's all I did. And
Yeah.
I became a successful person at work. I, everything that Gianna needed was provided for. All of our needs were provided for. And I don't have much to do with it. Jesus just did it all.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. That's really cool. Um, what do you wish that pro-life Christians knew or would do more of?
I wish they would support their local pregnancy resource center.
Okay.
It's been really a joy for me to kind of come full circle. I now give regularly to the same pregnancy resource center that gave me all that stuff.
That's
And
so cool.
last week I went to their gala and I recorded my testimony, and they played it at the gala. There was like 250 people there from the
Oh my
community.
goodness.
Yeah. And we really need to give, and we need to volunteer, especially right now. If you want to support moms right now, the best thing you can do, especially for single moms, especially for the ones who are, maybe they've just graduated high school, maybe they're trying to get their college degree, and now they have this baby that they have to provide for, but they don't have a ton of resources. Um, with inflation so high, I when I fill up my tank, it hurts a little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think a good thing that you can do that's easy, even if you can't give like a monthly donation, is go to your gas station and buy a few gas cards and drop it off at the pregnancy resource center.
Oh, that's a good idea.
When you go to BJ's or Costco or whatever your big box store is, pick up a pack of diapers and drop it off. Even if you leave it on the doorstep, you know, um, women who are dealing with unplanned or crisis pregnancies, they don't just need the love of Jesus and the gospel, but they need practical things, right? This is like, when I was hungry, you fed me, right? Jesus
Mm-hmm.
wants us to serve people. And I was thinking a lot about the miracles that Jesus did in the Bible. A lot of times the miracles preceded a transformation of the heart. So like God would do something miraculous in Jesus. Like Jesus, here he is. He's God incarnate. And he would somebody would come to him and they'd have like a mangled hand and he'd fix it. And they'd be like, "You are the Christ." It's like,
Sure. Right. Yep.
yeah. And so I think when we meet a physical need, whether it's like the gas card or the
Mm-hmm.
diapers, we also inadvertently we get from the physical to the spiritual. Like they're once you meet that need, their mind is like free to open up to the truth of the gospel because they're not weighted down by the cares of this world.
Right.
So we
Yes.
as Christians have the ability to provide for the needs of, especially like the most vulnerable, like a woman in pregnancy. Who is more
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable than
Yeah.
the only other people that are more vulnerable are children.
Right. Yep.
A pregnant woman is so vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And vulnerable just means able to be wounded. There's a lot of things that can come against her, even inside
Mm-hmm.
her own body. Like I was so sick when I was pregnant with her. I
Yeah.
could not work. I couldn't stand.
Mm.
Um, And so serving their needs, I wish people knew more that they could do that, and that it doesn't take a bajillion dollars. Like, you don't have to be a wealthy benefactor. You can just be a person who offers. You can call them and say, like, what do the moms need right now? Can I drop
Mm,
off a freezer meal? You know, maybe it's that mom who's going to night school and she has her kid, and it would be easier if someone made her dinner once a week,
yeah.
right? I'm saying that
Very.
the church can be really, really practical, and we like practical. It makes us feel like we're a part of something, and like
Mhm,
we've accomplished something. So you can
mhm.
accomplish a lot with just a very little.
Yeah, so simple and like for like your diaper box example.
Hmm.
So simple, fairly inexpensive, but it can make the world of difference
Hmm.
to somebody who needs it.
Yeah, at Walmart, the big box of diapers is like $24,
There you go.
and it's got like, I don't know, 120 diapers in it.
There you go. That's
Yeah.
yeah, and just such a blessing that can be to somebody. So those are great suggestions. I love that. So I know you've kind of mentioned it a lot, but what were like the best resources you felt like you had during your pregnancy, or what are some things that you wish you had that you didn't?
I wish I had more girlfriends.
Okay.
Is the only thing I wish I had.
Okay.
It took me a long time to build friendships, especially because once I became a mom, I was like busy momming, you know.
Sure.
Uh, and
That happens.
I still had like medical issues even after, so it took me a while. Like, I didn't find my stride for a good long while.
Okay.
So that's the thing I wish I had. So it might be that if you are wanting to befriend a single mom, that, or a woman with an you're probably gonna have to go to her, or like
Hmm.
make things easy for her. Like, if you want to hang out with her, you're probably gonna have to pick her up,
Okay.
you know, or um, do simple hangouts, especially if she's having like problems with her pregnancy, or she's feeling nauseous all the time, you know, like me. Um, it was just so bad. So friends from the church would like drop off food. Like, I was a McDonald's fiend. I can't even like smell McDonald's now. But I could just live off a Big Mac. I could just I could eat two Big Macs easily. And I had friends from church who would just drop off a Big Mac and a milkshake just to say, I was thinking of you, hope you and the baby are good. The
Mm,
baby, you know, the one in my belly.
yeah.
Um, so that was something I wish I had more of, was girlfriends. And the things that were really helpful was the Pregnancy Resource Center, and the particular things that they provided were regular counseling and prayer, which we cannot diminish or um, overemphasize at all the power of prayer. And so there was that, and also then the practical things that helped. And I even got like legal assistance, so those
Okay.
resources were really good, and all of that was free and provided or um, facilitated through the Pregnancy Resource Center. So
Okay.
I'm a Pregnancy Resource Center girl. Like, just go walk over there and say, what can I do?
Okay. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Oh, I just want to like email every pregnancy resource center that's nearby now. That's what I'm
Good,
gonna
good,
go look for one now.
good. And you don't have to start big. Like,
Yeah.
whether you make a monthly contribution, even $10, or just every time you think of it, you get yourself gas and you get a $10 gift card.
Hmm.
No biggie, right?
Yeah.
It's just one Starbucks, basically. Just
Hmm.
forgo Starbucks once and buy a gas card instead.
There you go. Well, and it's so, I think that probably scares a lot of people. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but it can sound or feel intimidating
Hmm.
when we think of that, and whether maybe it's pregnancy resource centers, maybe it's something completely different, but when it comes to helping and supporting a cause of some sort,
Yeah.
then we feel intimidated, like, oh, I can't afford that, or I don't have time for that. Doesn't have to cost a lot of money, doesn't have to take a lot of time, just
Hmm.
give what you can. And even if at 1 week or 1 month all you can give is prayer, like you said, that is so vitally important.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, how can you give prayer? Well, most of us have smartphones. Your phone has a voice note. I would say you could pray for a mom on a voice note and email it to your Pregnancy Resource Center.
Oh my goodness, I love that.
because then they will email it to a woman who needs to hear that prayer, and that woman will then have it. And when she's feeling really dark and down, you bet your life she's going to be playing that.
Oh my goodness. What a great idea. Benefits of technology.
I send prayer voice notes to people all the time. So,
Do you?
yes.
But I love that. That's so cool. I would never have thought of that. So that's a great idea. Oh, wow. Well, Sharon, is there anything else that you feel like you want to share or talk about on today's episode?
I would just say to the people that are listening to this, probably a lot of ladies, right? And they are probably mostly people who agree with us, that the life inside the womb is precious. I remember the first time I felt her move inside me. I had left my cell phone in the back room of the church, and it was youth night, and I was sitting in the front, and my friend and pastor was preaching, and I felt like a vibration, and I was like, oh, my phone. And then I went, oh, my phone is not here. And I had like a moment like, oh my God, she's moving,
Oh, cool.
So like, I remember those moments. So not just in the fact that she was alive, that she was a moving, living, breathing being, that she liked music and she would dance when music was on. And I would have to I'd be arching my back trying to give her as much room as possible.
Oh.
She was kicking and dancing. Joy to the World at Christmas time at church. She lost her mind.
Oh, really?
Like, oh my gosh, like full on Jackie Chan. Like just
That's so funny.
So, it's not just that, but it's also this lie. Like, I'm so passionate about fighting the lie that Christians are just pro-birth. That is a lie. And so what I would say is share my story, share other women's stories, learn from them, ask, put it out on your Instagram or your Facebook. Do I know anyone who was served by a pregnancy resource center that wants to tell me a little bit about what happened to them? Because I'd love to be able to tell more people, especially women. You might encounter a woman in the grocery store who's pregnant and afraid, and you could just be a smile and an encouragement and say, I know a lot of people who were in your situation and they are doing great, and you are going to be great because you were born to be a mom. Like, you have all the makings of a mom. You are instinctually designed to be a mom, and you're going to be good at it. And there is nothing to be afraid of. It's like, do you have a uterus? You're a mom.
Yeah, right.
That's now. I'm not a biologist,
Right. I can't define that, but
we're gonna get canceled.
You never know. Oh, Sharon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
You're welcome. Can I pray for you and for your listeners?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Father, I thank you for Sierra. I thank you for her bravery and her boldness, and for the way that she invites people and listens to their story with grace and gives them an opportunity to share the work of God's hand in their life. I pray that you would give her ideas and make this podcast a thing that gives your name glory. I pray that you would make it an enjoyable experience, and that every second that she's doing this work, that she would remember that it's for you and you alone. I pray for the listeners that anything that I said that was not of you, or that was not virtuous or good or right or in line with your law and your word, God, that you would just help people to forget it, and that you would only cause people to remember that which is aligned with the truth of your word, which is that Jesus Christ came and lived and died and rose again, and he is coming again in glory to judge the living and the dead. And I pray, oh God, that you would move on the hearts of Christians here in Minnesota, where Sierra is, and in Pennsylvania, where I am, and in California, and in New York City, and in Texas, and all over our nation, to serve those who are hurting and to protect the unborn in the same way that you looked on us as unbelievers, as children. In Ezekiel 16, you walked by us and you said, live. I pray that we would look on the preborn with the same kind of compassion that the Father has looked on us. Your word says, behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Thank you that you've called us your own, and that we get to participate with you in bringing peace and joy to people's lives in very, very simple ways that ultimately point to the saving power of Jesus. May we be your hands and feet. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sharon.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad you tuned in for today's conversation. I hope you are leaving uplifted in your walk with the Lord, because that is my prayer for this podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at In All Things Pod, And I would love it if you invited more friends into our conversations. You can also visit my website at inallthingspodcast.com. If this episode was encouraging to you, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite listening platform because it helps the algorithms and it allows In All Things to be accessible to more people. See you next time.